Hello, everyone. My name is Charisse Bach, and along with Christy Randazzo, we are the co-chairs for the Quaker Theological Discussion Group. And so we're excited to hear this second day of panelists for the 2024 sessions that we're holding here together. So thank you, panelists, for being with us, and thank you, everyone else, for being here to listen and to grow and learn. We're really excited to be able to share these presentations and hear them on the topic of imagining just economies, Quaker approaches to divestment and the kingdom of God. And we have 4 presentations for you today, and we will hear those presentations, and between each presentation, we'll have the opportunity for one question and then do a Q&A at the end, question and answer for other questions that have come in. So as you are listening to presentations, please send a message in the chat directly to Christy Randazzo, and they will collect those, and we'll sift through them, ask maybe one question that is maybe a bit of a clarifying question, or something that kind of fleshes something out from the presentation between each presenter, and then kind of flow the questions together toward the end so that we have a good conversation about all 4 of the presentations. So that's kind of the way that we're going to do things. Send your questions to Christy, and we'll share those out loud, and the presenter can respond and then do a question and answer at the end. Also, on the second day of these panels each year, we try to do a little business meeting that lets people in on a little bit of the background work of how Quaker Theological Discussion Group runs and how to get involved, as well as helping us to think about topics that people might want to hear about next year. So this is kind of a brainstorming session and a time for people to share, like, what would it be great to hear presenters talk about next year, and we'll take that into consideration as we plan a theme for next year's panel. So without further ado, we will begin our presentations. And Pamela Haynes is going to go first. So I'll just share a brief bio from Pamela, and then allow Pamela to share with us this morning. So Pamela Haynes is an active member of Central Philadelphia Monthly Meeting, shares her passion about the earth, relationships, integrity, economics, paying attention, and repair of all kinds through writing, leading workshops, and speaking. She's a co-author of Toward a Right Relationship with Finance and author of Money and Soul, 2 Pendle Hill pamphlets, 3 volumes of essays for the Quaker Quicks series, and 3 volumes of poetry. And you can find her blog and podcast at pamelahaynes.substack.com. So Pamela, please share with us your presentation today.
No, there we go. Thank you. Had to get off mute there. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really pleased to be here. So, I guess I'll just jump right in. I'm talking about applying faith values to economics. What's a Quaker to do? Okay, I'll just do it. As we reach to ground our understanding of economics in faith values, our Quaker testimonies are a really great place to start. They give us a place to stand, and at the same time, they raise a host of challenges. Quakers value integrity, yet our economic system has no place for conscience. We value simplicity, yet our growth economy requires ever-increasing consumption. We value equality, yet our economic system seems designed to foster the opposite. We value community, yet our safety nets have gaping holes. We value good stewardship, yet are running heedlessly through precious common resources, threatening life on Earth. We value peace, yet economic exploitation of people and planet is violent at its heart. I mentioned peace last because I think that we as friends can learn from our experience with the peace testimony. So even though generals and politicians claim to be the experts, even though they say that war is the only option, even though we've never known a world at peace, we step boldly into the public arena with our Quaker values front and center and claim our right to call for peace. Now, it's harder with economics for many reasons. Economists have come to claim this space as their territory, naming themselves as the experts and creating a complex mathematical based quasi science. We're intimidated. What's happening with the economy is framed as inevitable. It may be hard, we're told. It may not be ideal, but there's just no other choice. Our vision is blocked. We're also told that this system is based on human nature and everyone's individual free market choices. So if there are problems, we're to blame. But we can learn from our experience with the peace testimony. Even though we've never known an economy that works for everybody, even though we've been told explicitly that we're incapable of understanding, we can still step boldly into the public arena with our Quaker values front and center and speak truth to power. And we can be helped by the Greek roots of the word, management of the home. Now, the home is something that we all know about and where our values are central. We can also be helped by the thinking of theologian Walter Wink, who says that spirit is at the core of every institution or power, that spirituality, however, can become diseased. The task of the church is to identify these powers, discern whether they still contribute to the common good, and if not, redeem them and call them back to their original divine vocation. So, here are 6 big ideas that can help us see the disease and call economics back to its divine vocation. I love that concept. First, center and measure what we value. Our core measurement tool, the gross domestic product, tallies the sum of all economic activity. But this includes many things that don't add to our well-being and excludes many that do. Private prison and predatory lender activities, for example, are included as positives. In agribusiness, on the other hand, the pollution from heavy machinery and transportation, pesticides and herbicides, damage to the soil, small farms, farm workers, and farming communities are all considered externalities. They're left out of the balance sheet altogether. And we don't measure the work of caring at all. Clearly, we need better ways to assess our well-being. Second, replace linear with circular models of production. The linear extract, produce, consume, discard, repeat story may have seemed workable when our planet was lightly populated and the supply of natural resources and fossil fuel energy appeared endless. But it is no match for a deeply interconnected web of life on a finite spaceship Earth. As we align human systems with Earth systems, we get to think instead about renewable energy, about waste from one product becoming the resource for the next, and about building reuse and repair into design. We move from extraction to generation. Third, reclaim the commons. Fencing English pastures is often seen as the first example of enclosing the commons. But colonialism and the settling of North America was the enclosure of indigenous commons on a global scale. This enclosure is now happening everywhere: land, water, seeds, intellectual property, cyberspace, DNA. We're transforming caring services into commodities, privatizing public utility systems, financializing nature. We need to reclaim our common wealth from the rule of private ownership so that we can manage it for the common good. Fourth, make money a public utility. Currently, less than 5% of our money is issued by the government in the form of bills and coins. Private for-profit banks create all the rest when they issue loans. And the need to pay back interest on those loans supports the need for ever more growth. Since interest payments on bonds tends to double the costs of long-term projects, public spending directly into the economy to meet big public needs is much better stewardship of our commonwealth. Municipal or state banks can hold and invest public funds, keeping money at home. Guaranteed basic income, post office banking, and accounts at the country's central bank might better serve individuals. Fifth, move from individual to shared rights. With our emphasis on individual and property rights, corporations, which exist to make profit, have gradually amassed more legal rights than workers, communities, or the earth. If we shifted our allegiance to shared rights, we would prioritize human rights, citizens' democratic rights, worker rights, community rights to decide about shared quality of life and stewardship of their local environments, and the rights of nature to exist and flourish. Sixth, live within the donut. Kate Raworth, a British economist, invites us to imagine our economy as a donut. The safe space for life is within the donut itself. The hole in the middle is where we fall short on meeting human needs, and the space beyond is where we overshoot the planet's limits. This idea of donut economics can help us organize big climate and social economic issues into a coherent whole and see how working on both are interrelated. That's a lot. All of these ideas, they challenge the dominant economic model. Each one speaks in a language of values that can help inform our understanding, our conversation, and our action. So talking about understanding, conversation, and action, grounding ourselves in what's possible is a first critical step. Without a vision, the people perish. It's also been said that it's easier to imagine the end of the world than a new economic system, which is a lethal failure of the imagination. In reality, there is a new economy growing up all around us and all over the world, along with traditional indigenous economies that are increasingly inspiring others. And these provide values-infused models that give us hope and can be built upon, replicated, and scaled in all different aspects of the economy. From community wealth building in the old industrial town of Preston, England, to exchange of goods and services via a phone-based technology in Kenya, to the established and extensive workers' cooperative movement in the Basque Country, to organic gardens of Havana that provide much of the fruits and vegetables for its residents, to an electrical co-op in rural Liberia based on a solar microgrid, to the Public Bank of North Dakota, which holds all the state's public funds. These are just a few of hundreds of thousands of examples. More will feel possible when we know about them. There are many levels on which we can act toward greater economic integrity. In our personal lives, we can address our consumption levels, our understanding of what is enough, our purchasing choices, our giving and commitment to right sharing, our savings and investments. But we need to remember that there's no way we can live with complete integrity here by ourselves, since economics is at its base a social endeavor. In our Quaker communities, we can join in circles of discernment around economic issues. We can write statements of conscience. To what do I conscientiously object? We can make shared economic and investment choices that align more closely with our testimonies. In our local economies, we can find lots of opportunities where our great passion meets the world's great need. Engaging with the bigger forces at work, nationally and globally, is more challenging. One way to start is to just wade into the conversation, fiercely centering morality and claiming our right to ask the big questions that so often remain unasked. What is true wealth? What constitutes security? What needs to be equal? What do we measure? What is too much? Who is responsible for the future? Who should decide and control? It helps to understand the heart of this economic system, the nexus of private property and maximizing financial return, all in the context of a history of colonialism and racism. And the result, without active government intervention, traditionally through taxation, there is an inexorable dynamic. Since receiving interest gives lenders more, while paying back interest leaves debtors with less, inequality steadily grows. So we can look for levers that open up public conversation and allow us to begin moving toward power shifts and systemic change. And here's some examples. In campaigns to stop banks from investing in fossil fuel projects, the public is claiming a right to have a say in how wealth, much of which is their own, is deployed. In community wealth building projects, where local businesses, institutions, and local procurement are prioritized, people are invited to think about and practice the ownership of wealth in ways that challenge this system. In debt forgiveness campaigns, including efforts to get rich countries to relieve the debt burden of poor ones that are struggling with climate-related expenses not of their making, the dynamics of debt creation can be revealed. In public banking campaigns, members of the community open their minds to new possibilities around who controls and directs public wealth.
Excuse me, Pamela. We're about at time, so wrap it up if you can in about a minute.
I think I'm close. While we can't be active in all such campaigns, it helps to know that they're there, to understand their significance, and to find our right relationship to them. I'm helped here by more advice from theologian Walter Wink. He says that our role is to listen for what is ours to do that, no less and no more, and then to wait in quiet confidence for a miracle. Dan, to sum up, To be part of reclaiming our economy's divine vocation will require us to build and exercise our spiritual muscles of hope, courage, and connection. A discipline of hope calls for a repeated decision to be present to the goodness of our world and to unseen possibilities, regardless of all the pressing reasons for despair. These are times that call for enormous courage, yet how many of us are as brave as we would wish? How can we, as faith communities, intentionally support each other to keep taking the next courageous step? A sense of connection is central here. Friend Rex Ambler talks about how our anxious attempts to put things right are often rooted in the fear and vulnerability that come from separation from others and from this remarkable creation of which we are part. As we are able to cherish and claim this whole, we become able to bear witness in the economy as in all other parts of our lives with ever greater power.
Thank you very much for that great presentation, and appreciate you taking the time and the thoughts and sharing your insights. And so I'll just give a moment here as people maybe have some questions that they want to formulate and put into the chat to Christy Randazzo that we can select from for one question now and one question at the end, or I don't know how many questions at the end, but one question now anyway. So feel free to put your questions in the chat and send those directly to Christy.
And I would just say that I'm just coming off of a week of being sick, and I'm not sure how attentive I'm going to be going forward, but I'm just putting my email in the chat, and I'm happy to be in conversation with anybody via email. I'm going to try to stay um, present.
Thank you. You know, it's not fun to try to do something like this when you're not feeling 100%. Appreciate you being here, and it's nice that when we do things on Zoom, we don't have to go too far. But please do take care of yourself. I will ask a question now, and other questions as people are thinking of them we'll save for later. So feel free to keep sending those in. This question is, could you explain more about the link between household work or wisdom and our perception of economy as something too large for us to interact with?
Sure. So, so if you think about the divine vocation of economics, it's to help people live well, right? It's to have livelihood and to have what we need. And the household is really the core of that, where people are tending to need, where they're trying to gather together enough resources to be able to make sure that everybody's needs are met. So that's a part of a critical part of every economy, and caring is infused in that endeavor. That so that if you think about caring as an integral part of economics, we have the household as a model. And then you can look out and you can say, well, our close-in communities, we can think of them as a little bit of a larger model. Our geographical communities, how do we do our caring with our neighbors? How do we share? How do we watch out for people's well-being? How do we um, trade with each other, both physical things and emotional things? We're creating an economy where, again, where caring is central. Is that that's what I got.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate that. So it's like a microcosm, but it also is expandable.
Exactly.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you so much for sharing this morning. And we'll hear from our second panelist of today, which is Mary Watkins. And here's a little bit about Mary. As a liberation psychologist, she engages with community groups around issues of peace, forced migration, racism, psychosocial accompaniment, racial reparations, and social and economic justice. She co-facilitates alternatives to violence workshops and the Houses of Healing curriculum in prisons and accompanies forced migrants detained in detention centers through the American Friends Service Committee's Immigrant Rights Program. She's taught at Pendle Hill and at the Friends Conference on Psychology and Religion. So Mary, would you please share with us?
Thank you. Let me just get my stopwatch going. All right, let me share my screen. Okay, thank you so much for this opportunity. My relevant positionality with respect to these topics are that I'm the descendant on both sides of Quakers in the 1600s in Barbados and in Virginia. Both sides of my family that were Quakers were involved in enslavement and slave trafficking. And when I began to understand that, I was very shocked because what I had learned about Quakerism from Quaker school was all about abolition. So I've recently spent a lot of time studying the 100 years of Quakers before abolition, where there was great resistance to abolition amongst Quakers. And that is in a Pendle Hill pamphlet that just came out, which I hope you can read if you're interested. But today, I'm going to share work from a book I'm writing called White Work, Racial Reckoning and Reparations. And this is from a chapter that really tries to summarize what have been the Black-led demands for reparations. They've certainly begun even while people were enslaved. And the more grassroots movements began in the late 1800s, the more mass movements. I want to start with Ta-Nehisi Coates. And so we must imagine a new country, reparations, by which I mean the full acceptance of our collective biography and its consequences, is the price we must pay to see ourselves squarely. What is needed is an airing of family secrets, a settling with old ghosts. What is needed is a healing of the American psyche and the banishment of white guilt. What I'm talking about is a national reckoning that would lead to a spiritual renewal. And what I want to focus on here is this new country that is created through linking with the history of abolition. Abolition is really a misleading word because it talks about the end of things, the end of slavery, racist institutions, racist violence. But abolition has always relied on what we were talking about yesterday. It has relied on prophetic imagination and the deep desire of people who were able to imagine states of being that they had never been able to enjoy themselves. It has meant, not just looking toward the debts from the past, but what meeting those debts could help to create in terms of new systems of care, security, just economies, and institutions. The whole history of Black-led movement for reparations incorporates Afrocentric emphases on mutual aid, collective responsibility, and cooperative economics. And these were integrated in many small ways during the time of slavery, as well as afterwards. One way for white people, I think, to see racial reparations is as yet another gift from African Americans, because it's an opportunity to see ourselves and our ancestors more honestly, to return assets deprived from white supremacy, and to lean into creating the kind of just and truthful world we all desire, really trying as best we can to begin to separate racial hierarchy and supremacy from whiteness itself. So the chair of INCOBRA, which is a group I'm going to talk about, Willard Letts says, reparationists are the abolitionists of our time. The first large movement was started, I can see that it is obscured, the National Ex-Slave, I'm sorry, it's behind the, it's behind my screen sharing button. It was begun by Isaiah Dickerson, and then headed by Callie House. She was an African-American laundress from Nashville who was herself born into slavery. And after slavery, she was very concerned about aging former slaves who were in dire physical condition, both from the violence wrought on them and from the terrible working conditions and lack of health care and food that they had suffered for so many decades. She argued that the $68 million of cotton taxes that had been collected by the federal government from 1862 to 1867 should be used to fund the pensions. She went all around the country talking to small and large groups, gathering 600,000 members and 300,000 signatures for a bill to Congress, which was never approved. And what I really want to underline here is that it wasn't just that the federal government, stood by and did nothing. In almost every case that I'll bring up, the government actively thwarted attempts to create reparations movements. Callie House herself was placed under surveillance. She was disallowed from using the postal service, which meant that she couldn't send out information. She was unable to cash money orders because of the postal service, so that when people tried to pay their dues, she couldn't receive the money. She was eventually convicted of mail fraud and was imprisoned. She had no money to buy her way out of prison. There was no evidence that she had ever defrauded anyone, and yet the government painted her as a woman who was taking advantage of poor Black people, and she should be taken down. The next group, the Committee for Reparations, again, it's obscured by my screen share, was founded in the 1960s by a woman named Queen Mother Audley Moore, a Garveyite. She argued reparations is not just about financial compensation, but about historical memory, cultural identity, and dignity. She wanted to file a reparations claim against the federal government on the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. And she wanted those $36 million to go to help people immigrate to Africa, for those African Americans who desired it, for cultural and political development in Black communities, and to pay back wages for those African Americans who chose to remain in the US. Moore's abiding hope was that reparations payments would put an end to African American poverty in the US. And she linked the US efforts with other global efforts and framed reparations as a human rights issue. Again, during her 5 decades of activism, she was surveilled, harassed, and actually by the FBI. It was actually, they tried to recruit her to inform on her colleagues, which of course she did not do. The next group is the Republic of New Africa, and I want to give a little background to this group and go back to at the end of the Civil War, when Black people were asked what they wanted. Of course, they said land, and there was a field order created. It provided a southeastern coastal region to be populated only by Blacks and to be governed by them as well. 40,000 people were settled on designated plots of land. They built homes and began farming. Those on Skidaway Island formed a self-sufficient colony. That is, they elected a governor and appointed a sheriff. Those on the
Looks like Mary is frozen at the moment, so we'll hope that she's able to come back in and complete her presentation. So I guess
government.
Oh,
100.
Mary, you froze for a moment there. So
Okay.
yeah, so pick up after the part about electing a governor and sheriff.
Okay. So it's important to note that this plan would have created an independent Black belt. It was a plan issued by whites from the federal government. 100 years later, in 1968, when a similar proposal was issued by the Republic of New Africa, it was judged to be dangerous, subversive, and revolutionary, a plan to be stopped by any means necessary. The Malcolm X Society understood that the parts of the South that had been parts of slavery, obviously, that there had been created an internal colony, and they were taking their lead from the liberation movement in Africa in trying to propose that former US states, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and Louisiana, should be a Black belt where Black people would have their own self-determination and government. Of course, this has not happened. Very challenging proposal, but the group set about the New Africa Republic movement set about creating zones of refuge from white supremacy, schools, medical services, and economic cooperatives in Mississippi's Black Belt. And they called for Blacks in other parts of the United States to relocate to the South to help create new communities that operated with the basis of cooperative economics. Again, there was a lot of violence that was targeted to the members of the New Africa Republic. FBI's COINTELPRO targeted them. Members were subjected to harassment, arrests, and legal challenges. And the government perceived these groups or represented them as a threat to national security and made concerted efforts to undermine their influence and activities. In some ways, these groups scaled back their proposal and created something called the Jackson-Kush Plan and Cooperation Jackson. And instead of all of those states becoming a Black belt, they really focused on the Black majority counties along the Mississippi River. And the idea has been and is to build economic democracy, political self-determination, and sustainable development, not only in Jackson, Mississippi, which is majority Black, but in the surrounding Kush district. There's an organization called Cooperation Jackson, steered by Kalia Kunu, that's trying to create networks of cooperatives throughout this area in order to build Black wealth and autonomy and self-determination. And while the plan calls for financial compensation to address inequalities, its reparative vision involves creating new structures that generate economic justice, self-sufficiency, and determination. Community land trusts, worker-led cooperatives, Black-led institutions such as health services, schools, and local security. And a lot of the work around this is achieved through using people's assemblies and participatory democracy. Again, both federal and state powers have been unleashed against the people trying to build these networks. Mississippi has tried to ban cooperatives. It has placed Jackson in receivership and deprived it of adequate state funds. Mississippi state government is controlled by white forces, and the Jackson by African-American people. The next organization in COBRA, which was mentioned yesterday by Lisa, is trying to educate African Americans about a national approach to reparations. And the things in red you can see are the asks in terms of reparations: cash payments, land, economic development, funds for repatriation, for scholarships, community development, historical monuments, but also the exoneration of political prisoners. The general goals are to foster economic, social, and political parity and to allow for the full rights of self-determination. An organization that's partnering with them is called NARC, National African American Reparations Commission. And this group was assembled in 2015 to begin to answer the difficult questions of who should get reparations, how should they be distributed, what should they be distributed for, how can there be networks of support built so that HR 40, the national act, which keeps being defeated, to simply study federal reparations in the United States so that that can be passed. This group is really trying to create the framework so that as the federal government moves toward reparations, a lot of the basic questions have been answered. And I'll put their 10-point plan in the chat later. They've created a fund. Some people were asking yesterday how they can contribute to racial reparations. This group has created a fund for reparations and says it's an intergenerational community of white people working in solidarity with the National African American Reparations Commission in order to implement their 10-point plan. The Movement for Black Lives Matter from 2014 has also aligned themselves with these last two groups, and they're asking for reparations for the wealth extracted from our communities through environmental racism, slavery, food, apartheid, housing discrimination, and racialized capitalism.
And we're about at time, so if you can wrap it up, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, I will not do that then. One group that I've been following is the cooperative community of New West Jackson, which on a small scale is trying to put these ideas into practice. And they've taken an 8-block neighborhood that, as you can see from the picture, completely overgrown, people out of work and without work. And they've been trying to build cooperatives to really remodel their neighborhood along economic cooperative terms and to build self-sufficiency. Yesterday, there was the question about how people can support reparations, and I'm going to put this list of things in the chat in case you want to take it with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mary. We really appreciate you sharing all of this, and that will be helpful to have that list in the chat. And for participants who are here and might not want to have to copy and paste everything from the chat, we will send an email with resources that presenters have mentioned out after the session. So you can rest easy and know that we're going to send those out later, whatever the presenters are interested in having you all have as links and other places to go for more information. As well as I'll put in a plug for the journal Quaker Religious Thought, which is a journal that will publish many or all of these presentations as papers so that they will have all sorts of citations and references where you can learn more about these important ideas and organizations. So I'll pause here as people are probably writing questions in the chat, and we'll take a moment here to be able to process that presentation and think about what kind of questions that arise from what Mary has shared with us. So feel free to put those in the chat to Christy if you haven't already. And Christy, is there a question that you would suggest that we ask to Mary as the one between presentations here?
Sure. Both yesterday and today, folks have talked about generally sort of, these are the movements that we should connect with and that are doing the work amongst Black communities already. So we should be supporting those efforts. But there's a lot of folks in the chat who are interested in this question of specifically how could friends, is there something that you could point to that you think friends that, like maybe one or two things that we should really be focusing on, particularly in this present political climate.
Thank you. I think any sort of support that can be given to supporting HR 40 at the federal level is incredibly important. But I think I would learn from a lot of the work that's been done in Philadelphia. We have one reason I took time to write about the history of Quakers when they were actively supporting slavery is that I think it gives each of our meetings more impetus to say, we have things our own faith group needs to atone to and to repair, and to look at the communities in which your Quaker meeting is, and to look at the history of the ways in which white supremacy and racism have denied opportunities at various levels, and to try to create funds from your membership, and to raise funds from your community to invest in repair, like housing, education, non-extractive loans, helping people repay back education loans, etc.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your research on that. And I think that you're also going to drop in the chat the name and where people can find it of your Pendle Hill pamphlet that explores this history and more recent information more fully, so people can read that. So thanks so much, Mary.
Thank you.
And our next panelist is Lena Blunt, and so I'll share a brief bit of information about Lena. Lena Blunt is an organizer and writer working on environmental justice campaigns in the Philadelphia area since 2011. Lena currently works as the Director of Strategy and Partnerships for the Earth Quaker Action Team and previously worked for Pendle Hill. So Lena, would you please share with us?
Thank you, Charisse, and thank you all for inviting me here today. I would actually love to start, if folks would indulge me a little bit, with just taking some breaths, especially listening to some of the things that Mary just shared. I find sort of my heart just pounding, and I think as we face the material consequences of hundreds of years of white supremacy and extraction and slavery, as we talk about just economies here today, the reality of those wounds and the ways that even as we repair, I, as a white person, continually have to reckon with the fact that things can't be fully undone, and we're responsible for a lot of pain. And so I just want to take a moment, sit with the pounding heart and take some breaths before I move us to something else. Thank you. I'm really humbled to be here with you all. As I was preparing to talk with you today, I kept returning to the fact that I just have more questions than I have answers about a lot of these things. I'm going to talk a bit from my experience with the Earth Quaker Action Team. We're a group founded by Philadelphia area friends, and we say friends of friends, back in 2010, 2011. I went to my first training with Equate in 2011 when I was still a student. And that sort of launched me on a personal journey of the sort of radical genealogy that Mary was speaking to, figuring out where my people came from, and reconnecting with my Quaker roots and this faith community as my faith community. So I'll be speaking about some of my work with the Earthquaker Action Team and around divestment and this real tension or dynamic I feel in work around divestment, around collective witness and interdependence, and that dialogue and tension that can rise from a culture or a theology that is really deeply attached to identity and definition of individual piety or purity, and how consumerism is a backdrop for a lot of that within campaigns for fossil fuel divestment. Just to briefly talk more about divestment, I know Pamela discussed this as one of the many ways our economies can line up with our values. It can come from a moral place, but it can also come from a strategic place. And this quote certainly is one I think that guides work that Equate does. It comes from a sense of collective power and consent that can be granted or taken away when it comes to the powers in our culture. So this quote here by Gene Sharp, by themselves, rulers cannot collect taxes, enforce repressive laws and regulations, keep trains running on time, prepare national budgets, direct traffic, manage ports, print money, repair roads, keep markets supplied with food, make steel, build rockets, train the police and army, or issue postage stamps, or even milk a cow. People provide these services to the rulers through a variety of organizations and institutions. If people would stop providing these skills, the ruler could not rule. Now, we also know there's lots of coercions for why people provide these things. In the United States, oftentimes people don't have health care unless they have a job, or they can't have a house over their head unless they can pay their bills. So I want to acknowledge, as we think about this consent theory of power, that it's not necessarily so simple as, lightly removing our consent, but we have to build movements that provide for each other's needs to make the removal of that consent more tenable for those of us for all of us who have needs that do need to be met, and are coerced through a system that meets them as we trade our consent to power. So this is sort of a visual that Equate uses, and folks who do corporate campaigning often use to illustrate this idea of a consent model of power. I like this model because it actually speaks quite a lot to Quaker theology. Quaker theology, one could say there's not a priest at the front of the room, or a singular person who convenes with God, who is distributing their wisdom to the masses. There's not, power from the front flowing down, but there's power within. There's God within all of us, and how we build beloved community, or how we are together, is part of how God lives in the world. And if we take this back to our work for economic justice or corporate campaigning, one could think about the pillars of support that prop up specific companies or specific sectors of our economy. For example, there's a version of a nonviolent direct action workshop that I've led many times that people maybe have seen Eileen Flanagan leave, if you know her, which looks at this pillars of support and breaks it down for the fossil fuel industry. If we were to have this, upside down triangle that's inherently unstable, that is the fossil fuel industry around the globe, what would be the pillars that support it? Of course, we have banks who loan to those companies. Of course, we have individual consumers. Of course, we have government policies and subsidies. There's lots of pillars of support for these industries. And like Adrienne Marie Brown teaches, there's fractals. So from each pillar, you could make another triangle, and you could build a strategy for a divestment campaign that gets incredibly specific about which pillars of support we're removing and how we're going to do our part to move a vast industry to change. Now, I offer a brief introduction to one of the pillars of support that the Earthquaker Action Team has been working on, which is the International Vanguard SOS campaign. Vanguard is one of the largest asset managers in the world. And for the last couple of years, 2, 3, 4 years, they've become the largest investor in fossil fuels internationally. They're heavily invested in climate change. As I mentioned, for the last several years, they have over $270 billion directly in fossil fuel companies and about 180 billion in projects to expand fossil fuel infrastructure. So when we look at the realities of climate change and what science says to us about the imperative to stop burning coal in particular, oil and gas, we know we can't be building new infrastructure. So Vanguard's role and banks' roles in funding this expansion is a really critical part of the puzzle as we grapple with how do we prevent catastrophic climate change. As I was listening to Mary share and Pamela share before her, I was thinking a lot about interconnection and about justice. And Vanguard, their corporate headquarters are in Malvern, Pennsylvania, about 45 minutes from where I'm sitting here right now. They employ thousands of people in southeastern Pennsylvania and were founded a little over 50 years ago on an idea that they wanted to make investment more accessible for the everyman. There's quite a cult of personality around the founder of Vanguard. Um, there are websites dedicated to him. People proudly identify as bogleheads or this idea that, people should share wealth. And the more I've been in this work, the more I've had to reckon or grapple with which people, what wealth, and at what cost. Because while it's true that Vanguard in some ways made investment, reachable for a lot more of middle class America, people suddenly had access to investment through their retirement funds. We're still in a global economy that's built on colonialism, extraction, and white supremacy. And so today, the profits that come from retirement accounts and things like that are off of bonds and investments in projects like the Mountain Valley Pipeline, where Vanguard is a major holder of bonds in EQT, or the East Africa crude oil pipeline. When we talk about justice, I use this example because it really shows the imperative of global solidarity. There have been activists throughout East Africa, particularly in Zimbabwe, putting their lives on the line to push back on this project for many years. And there's been successful solidarity all throughout the EU, particularly in France, pushing banks not to invest in Total. Total Energies being one of the largest companies pushing the pipeline. And they've moved now over 20 EU banks to commit to not work with Total. And then right there, you have the US investors and the US banks stepping in, Vanguard then stepping in to invest in Total to prop up these projects. And as I do this work, I resonate with something Pamela said earlier about how we're really encouraged to get overwhelmed. It's all too complicated. It's all too, the ways these things are interconnected, leave it to the experts. Don't think about where these profits come from. There's a lot of cultural encouragement to not question or hold companies accountable. I mentioned Equate's a part of an international campaign. For the last almost 4 years now, Equate has been showing up here in Malvern, about 45 minutes away at the global headquarters. But back in 2023, we felt the call to invite people to divest, to look at their personal funds as retail customers, and move their money out of Vanguard. And the reason we made that choice at that time was Vanguard was starting to publicly slide backwards on their very few climate commitments. They left the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative publicly in December of 2022 and then defended that choice. They lag behind their peers in support for environmental and social shareholder resolutions, and their voting record has only been getting worse. In 2024, they supported 0 environmental and social shareholder resolutions, which is truly behind their peers in the industry. So we decided, as people of conscience and people of faith, to draw a line in the sand and begin inviting retail clients to move their money. And this is where I come to the themes of that really inspired this talk. When we think about moving our money as a personal purity, as just about our loan integrity or our loan goodness, I think we can become incredibly stymied. I appreciated the quote from Rex Ambler that Pamela lifted up, that our fear to put things right comes from separation. If we see ourselves as part of a collective and we see ourselves as part of creation, not only does this question of individual purity become increasingly meaningless, but we have to be accountable to justice in a different kind of way. And we have to be accountable to collective action in a different kind of a way. Some of the questions that come up in our money moving webinars perhaps come up in you as you think of this. They certainly have come up in me. Is there a place I can invest that reflects my values? What does it mean to garner profit off of investments? And how do I individually reconcile myself with what I feel comfortable profiting off of? And this fear that our needs may not be met if we break out of the cultural pressures. In the US, we don't have deep safety nets. I tried in preparing for this to go through some of John Woolman's journals, go through some notes of Quakers who've wrestled with divestment through abolition or boycotting slavery and through other places. And I wish I had a nice long list of all of the quotes for you. But suffice it to say, this tension of individual action and collective action seems to be persistent throughout. And my invitation as I close is simply to invite us to continue to wrestle with the questions of how do we see ourselves as a collective, and what does divestment or justice or reparation mean if we can remove our desire to be affirmed that we are individually pure enough or good enough. Because I feel moved by a theology and beliefs that say there is that of God in all of us, and we can't. That means right now, as we are, and I think that is both incredibly powerful and calls us to account in a deeper way than individual forgiveness or affirmation. I know we're at time, and I am really excited to be in this community of theologians and folks who study these things because I just know I'll keep learning new sources and citations. I've been madly writing, but I'll close there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lena. We really appreciate you sharing about your work and the work of the Earthquaker Action Team and some of the questions that there are still to wrestle with this topic of divestment and what a just economy might look like. So thank you for that. I'll pause here as people can send in some questions and process what we've heard from Lena for a moment. And as you all are formulating your questions to send to Christy in the chat, I'll ask Christy to share one question that has come up that seems most salient so far.
Great. Thank you again, Lena, for your presentation, and thank you for your work. Equate is dope, and I love what y'all have done. It's just awesome. So you mentioned the power of narrative to define our perceptions, particularly the personality cult of the founder of Vanguard, sort of shifting how we understand what is effectively a money extraction organization. So could you speak more about the power of narrative to shape our worldviews, particularly in relation to friends who have struggled for years with our own narratives of exceptionalism, and that may have hampered our work? It's a big question, so I'm sorry for dropping it, but I feel like it's something we can return to in the discussion as well. So thank you.
Yes, I think just really noticing what we take for granted and where narrative can be used to hide culpability. For example, something that can come up in the Vanguard campaign often is people say, "Oh, well, they're a passive investor. They only invest in indexes." And I'm not going to go off on how those specific things are not even entirely true on the surface, but one of the bigger pieces is this is a company that's only 50 years old. Humans have made these systems. Humans have made index funds. Humans have made choices that shape our world and shape our sense of common sense and shape our vision of what is and is not possible through narrative, through aligning those narratives with people over time, which is, I think, how we get this cultural agreement of common sense. And so I think uh, to invite ourselves into some more playful narratives or narratives that reckon with the fact that not only have people shaped the narratives before us, but that we are people right now who can shape our narrative now and can shape the narratives in the future.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that shaping the narrative in the future is kind of one of the reasons that we chose this theme of imagining just economies. That's like, what can we imagine and start living into? What can we direct our lives toward, including our finances, or whatever we're using to support ourselves with the needs that we have. So thank you for bringing that in and helping us to create a bit of vision. I really appreciate that, and think it adds a lot to the conversation. So thank you, Lena. And with that, we'll move on to our final presentation, which is a few friends who are going to be sharing the time together. And so I'll share with you their bios. We have Sharice Harrison Nelson and St. Clair Almond, who are being accompanied by Nathan Schroyer. So I'll read brief parts of their bios. We will also put everybody's full bios somewhere that you can see them. I'm just pulling out excerpts of each person's for today. But Sharice Harrison Nelson is an educator, narrative, visual, and performance artist named Maroon Queen, and arts administrator. As the co-founder and curator of the former Mardi Gras Indian Hall of Fame, she was the co-editor of 11 publications and coordinated numerous exhibitions and panel discussions focused on West Africa-inspired cultural traditions from New Orleans. Her creative expressions have been performed, presented, and exhibited throughout the city and world. Then we'll also be hearing from St. Clair Almond, who was a student activist at Virginia State University from 1981 to 83. He was part of the Free South Africa movement and a Trans-Africa activist from 1985 to 91. And he served as a youth correspondent to the Pan-African Revolutionary Socialist Party. He also served as a local chaplain, communications officer, and minister of information for Prosser Truth Division number 456. From 1990 to the present, he's been a Quaker street missionary, and he is the African Organization International Organizer and National Chairman since 2017 until now. And then Nathan Schroyer's life has been defined by deep commitment to community engagement. By creating sustainable, inclusively conscious frameworks, he's used his combination of planning and development skills with a socially conscious economics model to build and sustain affordable and first-time homebuyer housing. He actively participates in Chester River Friends Meeting, a Quaker community in Chestertown. So we'll open the floor to the three of you, and I believe you have some music you'd like us to play, so let us know when is the time for that.
This is the time.
Great, Christy will go
The
ahead.
time is now.
Yes, great. Christy's getting that queued up, and we'll play that moment. Oh, but we can't hear it, Christy, because probably you have headphones on. So
Yeah,
maybe
you might wanna play it. It's not working on my end, sorry.
Okay.
You know what? We'll move on without it. That's okay. That's part of the miracle of cyberspace. And what we were doing is we were just trying to introduce this with some music, because culture, when you bring culture bearers into a room, oftentimes you do things with senses that are different. You're going to see me joggle my glasses back and forth. I got my broken glasses out of the car, but I have to wear sunglasses after I do too much right brain, left brain work. I get a headache. But I deeply appreciate that you all have had us here. And I responded to this just really briefly. I got my timer for 2 minutes, because divestment and the kingdom, KIN, is something that we all aspire for, but that we haven't figured out how to get there. And I believe that we get there with culture and culture bearers. And so those folks are going to come here, and I'm here in their accompaniment. We also had in our prepared script some words that you may not know that I'll just introduce here. The intra-perfectibility, that we're all responsibility, and we all have responsibility in what Quakers call the perfectibility. And that is a form of universal determinism that might occur in a post-racialized healing world. And then I just wanted to introduce really briefly, because my notes change. I'm sort of a person who prepares everything and then throws it all out. And I threw it all out because I felt like I wanted to bring up the scene in Beloved, the book by Toni Morrison, in which the woman who's just escaped from Kentucky and arrived in Cincinnati goes to the house of the Quaker and is met by a black servant at the door. And the black servant says to her, the first thing you have to know is to knock on the back door. I feel like that's an interesting form of currency for this presentation right now, and for what Quakers have been wrestling with. In the 200 years, just like Lena was sharing, which is half of Quaker time, we've destroyed the entire ecosystem of our planet. And so we have a culpability. But in culture work, what we do is we commodify, we co-opt, we're culture vultures and poverty pimpers, and all the things that St. Clair and Charisse, I hope, will touch on. So I'll stop there. This is intra-particularity. And what we're trying to work on here is a very simple phrase of regaining indigeneity, white people don't think about ourselves as needing indigeneity, but we come from indigeneity also. And the Lenape people say it very clearly. We are all related. So with that said, I'd like to pass it first to Queen Reese, my high school friend. We both went to McMain, but at different times. And then you could just pass it to Brother Ace when you're ready, Queen. Thank you for being here.
Well, first of all, I would like to say thank you, and I'm honored to be in this space and to listen to some of these topics that are difficult to sometimes talk about. And as a person who participates in a cultural expression that is deeply rooted in metamorphosizing trauma, pain, economic trauma, and all of the ways that society and the powers that be have figured out how to institutionalize the not being able to acquire generational wealth. We have wealth in our cultural expressions, the things that have maintained and sustained us. I think that people who participate in these cultural expressions that are rooted deeply in us from our ancestral homeland are spiritual first responders. But you know, spirit can only take you so far. And as an artist, I have who is a narrative artist, an activist, and an advocate for justice, I have experienced the ways that that type of work isn't funded at all or seriously underfunded because voices want to be silenced. And it's so apropos that I would be in this space because I have a character, the plague doctor, and I have a monologue in a play that talks about selling of bodies, brown bodies in our contemporary world. Then people are still selling us when they take our images and sell photographs for literally $3,500 without identifying the subject, the gang, the group affiliation, or anything about the person. They say it's their wealth because they went to school, they did everything to be able to take the picture, but no reciprocal respect for the artistic creation and what went into that, which is I lived through my ancestors, through colonialism, and I'm here. And this cultural manifestation is the empirical evidence that I didn't forget who I was, but I also still feel the pain. And I don't know, Nathan, you may need to guide me a little bit because my mind is all over the place.
You did it. You did it, Queen. You set the stage. Why don't we pass it along to St. Clair Almond, Brother Ace, and we'll come. Are you there, St. Clair? Okay.
Hello? Do you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, everybody can hear me.
Go ahead.
Okay. My name is St. Clair Allman. I'm here in the Richmond Friends meeting in Richmond, Virginia. I won't comment. I won't comment much. I can't comment much on perfectibility, Quaker perfectibility as it relates to the intra thing that Nathan has asked me to speak on. I can comment on it if I know exactly what he means by the intra by his terms. Bear in mind, it's a matter of framing and phrasing. It's a matter of codes and cues. Okay. I'm in a supermarket trying to do a Zoom on a telephone that I don't know anything about this technology, but I do know about reparations. I just do know about the Black experience. So most of what I'm going to talk about is going to be comments to what I did here. I lost contact for a moment on the Zoom, and I'm back on now. Thanks for having me as guest. I'm going to talk about infrastructural inequalities, the infrastructural inequalities that exist in the system, and how the system reform and reconciliation is cool, but at this point, this system does not need reform and reconciliation. As this system is the Republic of the United States of America, it needs total change and transformation. And when I say total change and transformation, that means that reform and reconciliation is not the dynamic. The dynamic is now, as far as Black people is concerned, is reparations and repatriation. Back in the day, it was abolition and immigration. Now the clamor and call for Black people, the real Black intelligentsia, is for reparations and repatriation for those who voluntarily, discretionary would like to go back to their fatherland and mother country and tie their chances here. Another thing I want to talk about is and I have some questions too for some people that I did hear when I was online. I want to talk about Callie House. I'm glad that everybody learned something about Callie House and how they jailed her for what she was trying to do. I can say that here we deal with a matter of wealth, resources, and power. And who controls that power, resources, and wealth? Okay. As long as the white dynamic controls it, okay, rather than equality and everybody controls, you don't have the kind of America that you're looking for. Okay. So you need a whole new America, no change, no congressional or legislative or no nothing, but a total dismantling of white power. America represents white power ever since we need to find out who the Baconians are. Nathaniel Bacon here in Virginia led a rebellion long time ago. Okay. Killing Indians, stuff like that. Now, and then along came others after that. And everything. And it was all set up and designed to create some type of apartheid system or some type of capitalist, racist interconnectedness. Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about, interconnectedness with Brother Stroyer. We are all interconnected. But as far as reparations is concerned, you didn't steal Black Americans, you stole Black Africans. So Africa is who's owed, but then Africa owes it to her children scattered around the world in the diaspora to develop her communities wherever her communities may be domiciled. And to me, that's reparations. NCOBRA, a great organization. UNIACL, even a greater plan, a master plan. So there are plans and stuff like that. And we are developing those plans. But please don't offer nothing until you ask. Don't offer the Indians anything until you ask. Quakers, don't offer the Blacks anything until you ask. Because if you do that, then you're doing shit on you. You're doing your thing. You ain't doing all our thing. Everybody's saying you're taking the initiative to do something that move is not a mutual move. Mutual move is when people, when there's a joint, a shared, a common, collective action. And that's all I really got for you right now. I'll turn it back over to y'all.
That's beautiful. Go ahead, Queen. You got something you want to put in here?
Hey there. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead. Mute yourself, St. Clair, for a second.
Excuse me. Well, I would just like to add to what Sinclair, I agree with what Sinclair said. You need to, be in alignment and in dialogue to determine what any form of reparation looks like and what people want. One of the things, and this is very specific for me, that I want as an artist, and I suffer from depression, and I'm very open with talking about that. Because I feel like we need to talk about depression because it is a serious mental ailment. And I know that part of my depression, I feel, is what I carry in my DNA and in the marrow of my bones. It's ancestral. It's what happens to a dream deferred from Langston Hughes. Life ain't always been no crystal stair. But why? Why has it always had nails in it? You know, why has it been so hard to move up that stair as an American? And a lot of what we talk about, in my opinion, is really human respect, dignity, rights, and reciprocality, as far as wanting for others what you want for those who you share DNA with those in your love circle, wanting and doing and being in alignment and moving forward in mutual ways, um, in ways that you don't know who's giving and who's receiving, ways that you strip away all the things that separate us and you want for others the things that make us equal as human beings when you strip away the outside brown skin. And I'll just, because it's on top right now for me, I think I mentioned earlier that I was an artist activist. And it's so apropos again, like on this conversation with people from the Quaker faith, because one of my monologues in my play is actually about, it references that. And I also deal with the Underground Railroad Station. I've not been able to get any major funding for my project. You know, my project is I go and do a plague doctor installation. I'm dressed in all white. I don't talk. And it's a performance installation. And I don't talk to represent white silence. The many ways that people who call themselves white, I don't particularly like using that term because it was a term developed to make humans hierarchical. That's the root of that for me. So I don't like using white, but the ways of white silence, silence in the face of our ancestors being stolen, forcibly brought here, the human trafficking, all the things, ways they rename what was done to our people. And I don't want to be a victim because I'm a survivor. But why is it I could easily get funding if I said, you know, I want to show like, you know, blackness and the secrets of the tradition. I could get funding for that, but I'm not telling the secrets. But when I want to do a project that talks about how this tradition and how cultural expressions have been metamorphosized, and I talk about what we're metamorphosizing, I can't get funding. And I know why, but for me, that would be something. I'm not even really, I'm asking to support my humanity, my ability to live a happier life, because my depression impacts my life, but my art creation enhances my life. Do you realize how devastating it is to know you submitted a good proposal and to know in your heart the main reason it wasn't funded is because you're dealing with a topic that people don't, they want to continue to um, mask it, and they can't find a way to wash their dirty money and support it? I'm just saying, asking for myself.
Okay. Am I still online?
Go ahead, St. Clair.
So everybody's talking. Okay. Okay. You know,
You
there's
got the mic.
individual.
Go ahead.
Or see leadings. I don't see no openings because what I see is obstruction. But I know that if it's a trip. It's sort of like I've been going to a Quaker meetings for almost 10 years now. This is the ninth year since 2015. And I can tell you, obstructionism, all I see is obstructionism. I'm on a committee of Baltimore yearly meeting. Not am I only in racist, rebel, Richmond, Republican Richmond, reactionary Richmond, but with the Baltimore yearly meeting, I submit. I'm on a committee. The committee is called Growing Diverse Leadership. Diverse leadership to me might mean diverse leadership means something other than white male hierarchy. Diverse leadership means you got the widow or prisoner that's a decision maker, that is a influencer, that it's you got somebody handicapped or disabled, that's diverse. You got women, you got students, you got all sectors that's in the leadership and the higher echelons of Baltimore yearly meeting. But that ain't happening and stuff like that. So great, growing diverse leadership is a joke, really. Before that, I was on the reparations committee of BYM. The obstructionists, the clerks and assistant clerks all end up being obstructions. See, races are very easy to look at. I mean, to see. They're easy to peep. All you got to do is do something really, really progressive for blacks, or really, really progressive for Native American Indians, the independent indigenous Indian inhabitants, and or some for the blacks. And wherever you see pushback, wherever you see fallout, there's your racists. They're easy to spot. Not only that, they smile all the time. Smile. I mean, smile at black people. I'm saying. So you can tell that's sort of like that's what I mean by phrasing and framing. In this case, cueing the cues. Yeah, the cues is certain cues. It's certain phrases and framings and stuff that has to change. That change the change and transformation with that. Who's telling the story? What's the narrative? And who's behind the narrative? You know, see what I'm saying? So the obstructionism is a trip. Like I said, I can do ideological stuff. Am I getting support here? Ideological? Am I getting spiritual support for my ideological gift or my literary gifts and stuff like that here in Richmond, where Richmond Friends meeting? No. The answer is zilch. But there are some people that's got love in their hearts. And so what I'm seeing now after 9 years is that if you really, well, people, because Quakers got a tradition for it. If you're really serious about peace and love, if you're really serious about truth and rights, if you're really serious about freedom and justice, then it should be easy to do, it should be easy to get this thing together. It should be easy. But if you don't, if there's a problem, that means there's obstructionism. That means you're saying one thing, a lot of beautiful stuff, like the beautiful stuff I heard before when I was online. It's beautiful shit, but what you're actually doing is not doing nothing. But that's just Quaker thing. I don't know. Everybody on this line probably ain't Quaker. And I'm not saying all Quakers ain't doing it. I'm loving Quakers. I'm glad that I am a Quaker. You know, I'm not a black Quaker or a white Quaker. I'm a Quaker as far as Quaker. And as far as whiteness, yeah, whiteness got to go. You know what I mean? Blackness got to go. This race dynamic, the dimensions of it. I do want to say one thing before I go off. To the lady who spoke first, and the lady who spoke first, you talk about the commons, who talked about the commons and stuff like that. You do the commons and enclosures. Well, when it comes to black people, okay, we got what's called tribal villages, okay, for the most part, okay, even though it's national groups in Africa and around in the Caribbean, East Indies, West Indies, black or black, whatever. So, but still, we don't deal with enclosures and commons. How do you deal with somebody who deal with tribal villages and ethnic communities? We deal with ethnic communities and tribal villages. We don't deal with prime ministers and presidents. We deal with kings and chiefs, chieftains and kingdoms, kings of stuff. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah.
That's brilliant, St. Clair.
How do we deal with that?
That's brilliant. Thank you for leading us out. And thank you both.
Thanks. All right.
Yeah, thank you to all three of you for sharing from your heart and bringing these really important ideas to us, and the need to actually live out the things that we talk about, which I think is one of the reasons also that we wanted to do this topic of not just imagining, but living out this kingdom of God and being able to do the things instead of just talking about it or making minutes or, making a plan for a plan, but actually doing reparations and building the beloved community.
Got to get rid of your Rhodesians first, your Baconians first.
Thank you. So I think we'll ask you all one question and then have a little bit of time for some Q&A with all the panelists. So let's see, Christy, do you want to pick a question to ask for this this group?
Sure. I, I was wondering, you speak a great deal about the framing of reality and who has the power to frame reality, through the use of specific terms, through the definition of specific terms, through the silencing of other terms, but the power to actually define what thing is and is not is oftentimes an unexpected or unapproached, unresearched, whatever way of power actually imposing itself. So I was wondering if you've specifically defined terms in your presentation, the interparticularity and what have you. And I was wondering if you could speak just briefly about that idea of the power of redefinition, and who actually has that power and what that means.
I'm going to kick it off because I don't know if the other two can see you, but I just want to say, Doctor, that is another dissertation. That's a 5-hour answer. And thank you very much for the very difficult question. But I have a very short answer, which is from a Black Indigenous woman who shared it with me, which is that in any space worldwide that you ask Quakers to release power, resources, or narrative, they will constrict white Quakers. They will constrict. But to your specific question, there's a very easy answer, which is who holds the definitional power? And what does definitional power when you hold it over people? So I would like for the other two to maybe speak to that, what it feels like, or however you want to respond, but on the question of definitional power or being defined. Thank you. Go ahead, St. Clair or Queen Reese, either, please.
I'm trying not. I'm not sure I understand what definitional power is. I think I do, but if you could just give me a little clarity so I'm not saying something too whack.
Definitional power, the way I'm using it, is that the people who have the question, who have the authority, who are authorized to come up with definition. In other words, who has control over language and what is the impact of definitional power on oppressed peoples?
Well, for me, that is I struggle with identity and myself, but that is very important, and especially for artists. And I'll just give you my example that I always give people. Most Western-based art is enjoyed by masses passively. You go to a museum and you look at the art on the wall, or you sit in a concert and you listen. What we do is community-based, but they call it street culture. Street is a hierarchical word. And if you put the Met, the Boston Symphony, and New Orleans Social and Pleasure Sunday procession, you would probably put that procession last. What we do, we create art, but you do not go to a space to see it. We come to you. It is interactive. It is part of the community. It is part of what is in the ground that comes up through us, to us, and through us to share with the community. They can participate. It's not passive. It is joyous. It is the epitome of that metamorphosized trauma that we carry in our bones. But yet, when you look at funding models, I've been very fortunate to get one fellowship for $25,000. And this was about over 10 years ago. Most of the funding that will go to, and we're talking dollars and cents here, right? To people in the tradition, usually have a cap of $2,500 in it in the city. And you can see some white artists get supported for the development of their work. We do theater, but it's community theater. But they get money to develop the play, to have a reading of the work before they even produce it. So they're getting all of these points of support, and their audience is very elite. It's people that look like them, that think like them, that basically is for them. So they get funded by them. I don't know who funds them. But for us, what we have to justify, and they automatically come to the table with culture bearer or folk artist. But why is it, how could a photographer take a picture of me and his picture of me be fine art, but I be folk art? Which is another way it becomes hierarchical. And I look at hierarchical systems. When you say slave, overseer, master, those are hierarchical words, but it should be flipped the other way. The person that is enslaved, a human being, no one is born a slave. Don't call my ancestors slaves, because they were not. Let's flip that language and talk about the people who did not value another human being and call them what they are: human traffickers, people thieves. And why even the way of saying they ran away? They self-emancipated. How can you run away to live in a human state of not being enslaved? When you say you ran away like you're a thief, what are you stealing? Your freedom? You stealing yourself? I rebuke all of that. And when people use the word slave in front of me, I will usually stop them, ask them who they're speaking about, and tell them, if you're speaking about people of African descent, like you, they were humans who encountered some people who did not value them as human. They looked at ways to look at them as inhuman, and then they did the most hideous act by stealing them, enslaving them, constantly assaulting them. I have the picture that is up of me in my attire. There's a Me Too patch on it. We all know the history of Me Too, but my patch is Mother Africa crying, because that continent was assaulted. Its people were stolen, its resources continue to be stolen. And we all have ways of justifying, you live in America, I'm guilty of it too. I'm on an iPhone. I know that some of the resources that created this phone were taken to from the Congo and other places. And it doesn't really matter, all over. Everything that's probably used to make this phone that I use on a daily basis has a terrible history. So we become part of it. I bought stolen land. When you get right down to it, my house is sitting on stolen land, and I bought it. So we all have to reconcile, living in America. I don't know if I answered what you wanted, Nathan, because I will go off.
Well, no, that's it. Very deep. I think you very much answered it. You hit the nail on the head, and I'll leave it to Dr. Christie to tell us if we answered it correctly. Thank you for the question.
No correct answer. It's all just answering and being in the conversation. So thank you very much.
Blessings.
Thank you to all of you. And we'll ask a few more questions of all the panelists for the next 10 or 12 minutes, and then transition to a little bit of a business meeting. We should really mostly call it a brainstorming and get to know the QTDG meeting, because maybe business meeting doesn't sound very exciting, but it is helpful to have a meeting like that every year when we have a formal group or somewhat formal, semi-informal, trying to be organized group. So if you have any further questions you haven't sent in, feel free to put those in the chat to Christy, and we'll go through and hear from each of the panelists at least one more time, hopefully in the next 10 or so minutes. So appreciate all of you being here and sharing such important ideas that I think all of these ideas seem to kind of flow together to be able to nourish your imagination from some different angles, and help us to understand some things better maybe than we came in with. A question for Pamela. Can you say some more about what the spaceship Earth metaphor means for you and how useful it is for shedding light on the tasks ahead?
Sure. So I think that some of us grew up with this idea of a manifest destiny and an unlimited frontier, and we can just take new land and exploit new stuff because there's no end. And it was actually Kenneth Boulding, a Quaker economist, who offered that frame that we're living on spaceship Earth. So it's like the idea that a never-ending growth could just keep going and going and going and going and going. And wait, we got a contained thing here. So how do we think about an economy within boundaries, that we have to think that we're that we can't just um, extract and extract and expand and expand and extract and expand. We have to live within our means. So in a way, it's kind of like bringing us back to that household, that there's a context, there are boundaries, there's ways that we have to restrain ourselves. We have to live with our share, uh, knowing how many other people are here in this same space. So there's a couple of thoughts about that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And that connects with Welling's presentation from yesterday, where she brought in Kenneth Boulding and Spaceship Earth. So good to make connections across the two panels as well. For Mary, there's a question about who do you know of? Like, are there people who are modeling equity on Indigenous lands? The question doesn't go beyond that, but I'm thinking of are there friends who are doing this well, or other groups that you know of who are doing a good job that you would point people to as an example?
Sure. My focus hasn't been on that, but I've been, attentive to it. And I would refer people to Elaine Inn's book and Ched Meyer's called Healing Haunted Histories. It's a wonderful book to read with a small group of people, because it has a study guide that goes with it. And it's all about returning land and returning stolen assets to help projects of Indigenous folks who have asked for funds and energies to be able to do things like revitalize culture, revitalize language, and actually have land and autonomy.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really good book with some helpful tools and examples of from a Mennonite perspective of some of this work of reparations and land back. So we can put that, someone can put that in the chat who's not talking, and as I am right now, and we'll send that out to everybody after the session. And for Lena, I think that there's a question in the chat that we could go with, since everybody can see it. But we got several other questions as well, but let's go with the one that's in the chat. I think you or Lena actually just answered it in the chat. So maybe maybe you could say out loud what you're thinking here, Lena. But the question in the chat is, isn't the individual and collectives this person might be connected to an interacting system? Related to that, wouldn't forgiving themselves potentially contribute to their ability to stand with folks who are marginalized? So I'm thinking this means with the ability to, if we're forgiving ourselves, how are we able to be in solidarity? Is that kind of the nature of the question? Do we kind of need to feel our culpability if we're white people who are trying to do this work? So Lena, do you want to take a shot at that?
Yes, and it's something I wish I could have sort of landed more completely in the talk, and it's part of why I use the word, the individual sense of piety or morality in dialogue with collective action, because I don't actually want to set them up as two separate things. I think certainly Indigenous folks and folks who have a philosophy or a culture that itself is not rooted in sort of Western individualness wouldn't make these separations between individual and collective as two things, that they're this dynamic, interactive, and overlapping piece. So I actually do think that reckoning or self-forgiveness for white folks is actually an important part of how we show up in spaces. So it's not driving how we interact with everyone all the time. I think it's actually, as this person puts in the chat, important. And there's a dynamic relationship perhaps between that self-reckoning and how we can show up in collective. So yeah, I apologize for not quite landing the ways that I've learned a lot from particularly Black feminists and folks who I think do a lot of work to remind us that there's actually not a separation between the individual and collective. We are constantly in relationship with each other. And I think actually Quaker theology offers us a framework for that as well, from the ways that we think of God as being both something uh, individually available, but collectively realized through our worship. Um, so I think there's a really rich overlap there, and so thank you for that question. I also put my email in the chat, recognizing there may be other questions people would like to bring to me that we can't reach today.
Thank you. And for Sharice and St. Clair and Nathan, we're wondering, what is one thing that you would like to see Friends do as far as reparations and the radical shift that St. Clair was naming about the need for moving away from all of the things basically that we do as so-called Americans. So I'd love to hear one thing from each of you that you'd like to see Friends do to start or continue down that trajectory.
Well, I'll go first. I think one of the things that I would like to see is what St. Clair said, is working together and moving forward in alignment. And, I guess because I just got a rejection and all of that stuff, as a creative person, I would like to see the presentation of artwork. I guess that is because I'm a narrative artist, that is collaboratively worked. That's some sort of collaboration, and the presentation of it to those audiences who are like, what does reparation look like? Even some type of art show with that a question like that. What does it look like? What does just economic justice look like? What does something look like to us? And then to have it also interpreted by those who think they know what it looks like. And then maybe some kind of something at the end where you're really open about it. And I think art and creative expressions are a place where you can have really difficult conversations. I mean, really real conversations around difficult subjects. And I think art and culture are sometimes left out of that equation when being honest. But as artists, people are pretty honest when they're, unless you're doing it as a commission, you are pretty honest when you create. So I would be looking for art and culture to be a part of this conversation. Artistic and cultural expression. I'll get it together to be a part of this conversation. But you asked an artist.
I'll hop in now too. I don't know if St. Clair will get it to this question, but I want to just say my deepest appreciation for Cherise Harrison Nelson and St. Clair Almond for being here, and also for just being able to stand in front of this particular stage and accept the way that it feels to be in a position where this Quaker people who are peacemakers sometimes don't recognize our history of harm. And I think we were explicit about that today. And I heard that from the other presenters. But I think that's the thing I would want to share to close out, is that what I've come to realize is that it's not easy for people to feel like, if race has always favored you, you're not likely to want to say, well, let me go work on my race. But
oh my God,
post-racial, we have got to find a way to get to, and thank you, dear Cherise, I appreciate that. But we have to find a way to get to white people doing the work where they're not also harming all of our Black, Indigenous, brown skin, and all the other people who have been marginalized and othered and harmed by white, even white saviorism, which is usually the form that Quakers start with, talking about all the things we've done, is another form of harm. And so you can't take that public. So if we can't start to do our work and name the commodification and name the theft of, not just theft of bodies, but the systemic theft and the structural theft that took the European system and placed it over the entire planet. So you ask a big question, you get a big answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our panelists and for everyone coming to be a part of this conversation. And I hope that we can take all of these thoughts and ideas and leadings with us back to our meetings and to our personal work, that we can recognize that justice is very interconnected with economic issues, that we can't separate out our justice work and the ways that we spend our money and other resources. So we will close out the panel.
Can I just add one thing, please?
Yeah.
It's really quick.
Please do.
When we're talking about economic justice and fairness, I just did a big project, and I can't do it all. I'm 65, so I always hire assistants to help me be able to do it. And so someone else was paying her, and they kept asking me how much to pay, how much should she be compensated for. So in my mind, I had $1,000, but someone added more money, so I was saying, well, maybe $1,250. And so I kept telling the gentleman, he kept saying, how much? I said, I need y'all to pay her what y'all pay white folks, because we don't know to go and rate for this work, because we accept whatever we get and we say we're blessed and we thank God for the blessing. And I kept saying, whatever white folks get, that's what you need to get. You need to ask the white woman who's the overall project manager to give the fee. And this woman got $2,500, which was twice as much. And I didn't know if I should be happy or pissed off. Sorry to say that. Because if that's what white folks been getting, I've been grateful for $500. Because normally I'm getting nothing. And I'm just getting a brain drain and literally asked to vomit my information into someone else's lap. And that is so horrible. And Chokwe, who was the mayor of Jackson, Mississippi, his son is in the mayor now. We went on a retreat, and he poured so much into me. He is like mentored me, and I'm so grateful for the time I was able to be mentored by him. And he told me one day, we were talking about cultural equity and why they pay African-American artists less. He said, we can't keep picketing and fussing and hollering. We need to, something my uncle used to tell me, look white men and white folks in the eye and tell them, you need to go in the room and fix yourself and your people. Ask yourself, why you're paying a group of African descendants 500 and a group of white boys 2,000. Until you answer that for yourself, why you think that's okay, there's nothing I can do because I gotta live and I'm gonna work and I'm gonna keep working. You're gonna keep paying me less until you fix yourself. It's like minimum wage. That's the least amount you can pay me. You can be equitable and pay me what I'm worth, but you can't pay me less than minimum wage. You fix yourself and you be equitable with your economic disbursements. I was more longer than a minute, but I'm done.
Thank you. That's a good challenge to end on, and an encouragement, a query, a good hard look at ourselves to go and do the work that we need to do and to listen to the Spirit in that. I think it's easy maybe to separate our ideas of spirituality and our economic choices. And so hopefully this panel and the important stories that Sharice just shared can motivate us to recognize the connections between and the necessity of our economic choices being also spiritual choices. So with that, I think we will close out this second panel for Quaker Theological Discussion Group 2024. Thank you to all of you for being here. And we'll stop the recording and we will move on to a few minutes of a business meeting to learn about Quaker Theological Discussion Group and consider topics for next year.
Well, thank you again. And thank you. Great to meet you,